Welcome to another episode of the Boxless World podcast, where we talk with guests redefining approaches to work and life. Today we are joined by Millie Kerr, strategic anti-racist lead at Brighton and Hove City Council, activist, pillar in the community, proud mum, and someone who has supported and inspired me. Millie, welcome. Your work it asks institutions to examine not only what they say, but how their systems, cultures, and decisions operate. And I'd love to just ask you about your personal journey that brought you to this work.
I suppose my personal journey started probably when I was quite young. I didn't have the easiest of upbringings really, and that um, I suppose I suppose made me think about the career I wanted to go into from a young age. Actually, I suppose from a teenager. So I knew that I wanted to be a social worker. I suppose from when I was in my teenage years, despite people maybe telling me that that wasn't the route for me. Um, and that led me into doing a health and social care course. Basically, then family couldn't afford to send me to university, even though I ended up being the first in our family to go to university. So I left college after doing a health and social care course and went straight to work really until I could afford to take myself off to study. And again, doing everything that people were telling me that black people don't do, because I'd set my sights on studying in Oxford and people kept telling me, oh, well, black people don't go there. But because I also convinced myself that I wasn't going to get there, I'd also planned to go traveling with a friend. And then lo and behold, I got a place there with only 24 places. Um, got in. And I suppose all my work around social work, which has predominantly been around working in child protection, working in child trafficking, working with care leavers, working in specialist services around child abuse linked to faith and belief and FGM, female genital mutilation. All of that involved always working with different communities, different religions, different cultures. So I suppose all of that led me into wanting to very much think about, which was primary reason I wanted to become a social worker, I suppose, due to my own childhood challenges, led me to the anti-racism work really, which is very much about how I think about supporting and helping people who look like me. But a big part of that is how I now, in my role, which I've been in for 6 years now within Brighton and Hove, I've lived in Brighton nearly 30 years, but stupidly spent a lot of time commuting. But all of that work in social work led me to this role because I've always been working with difference, always been working with different cultures, always been working with different communities. So it was very much thinking about how I support the workforce now to actually think about how they can be more anti-racist in their practice, so that they can think about how they support our communities better than they do now. Very challenging. Things have changed a lot, I suppose. We've moved forward, but it can feel as if we haven't moved very far in our present hostile climate. So I suppose that's the quick full circle. Wanted to support people that look like me, but now the anti-racism work is very much, particularly in my strategic anti-racist role, is very much how I think about supporting the workforce, to think about how we can support our communities better, as well as, I suppose, also working with our communities to a certain degree to help build trust and relationships.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and a bit of a dichotomy actually, because often when organisations talk about anti-racism, um, you know, there's a question about what is the difference between making a statement and creating genuine change. I'm just interested, how have you experienced that throughout your career? And is that something that is a challenge every day in the work that you're doing?
I would say that is a challenge every single day in the work that I do. We and many other local authorities, many other companies, the corporate world, whatever world we're looking at when we're thinking about employees, all talk through the lens of EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, or DEI, which is the other word that people use, which is diversity, equality and inclusion. But I personally, this is my personal opinion, don't feel that's working well enough, really. So, I suppose Brighton and Hove took a very brave step in very much focusing on developing an anti-racist strategy and not just wanting to just have a piece of paper that focused on a strategy and actions, an action plan, um, to focus on those strategies. Um, it was very much thinking about how they developed roles as well to make sure that the work was really embedded. So I started off in this work as what people call the first anti-racist lead in England, and then moved on to becoming the strategic anti-racist lead within children's services, and now more widely the strategic anti-racist lead, looking at how we enhance practice council wide, even though I'm one person and I'm mindful that I can't do all of that as one person. But I suppose what's been different and what helps, I suppose, thinking beyond equality, diversity, and inclusion and EDI is being explicit, because what is actually helping to move things along, and I'm under no illusion, we've made a lot of progress. People are beginning to think more and reflect a bit more. But I'm under no illusion that we're going to fix racism in my lifetime or my child's lifetime. But what has been really helpful and what has actually really engaged people, and it is uncomfortable. Lots of people are uncomfortable talking about race and racism, but we're explicit. The anti-racism role means you move beyond EDI from my personal perspective and looking just at protected characteristics, because I challenge the local authority, I challenge people I deliver training for to really think about, are we really providing a service to all, even if we're looking through protected characteristics lens, when actually those protected characteristics, if we're thinking about LGBTQ plus communities, the disabled, women, for example, we're often looking at white women who may be experiencing domestic violence, white women when we're talking about the pay gap, white children when we're talking about disability, when we're talking about our senior citizens. We could be talking about, without thinking about it, how we are providing those services to protected characteristics within the white communities. So I also challenge and get people to look through that intersectional lens about, are we doing the good job that we think we're doing when we're thinking through the lens of protected characteristics, being more explicit about looking at those characteristics through the lens of race. And when we look through the lens of race, it can be quite different. And that's actually been really helping when we're thinking about the anti-racism work we're doing, thinking about the anti-racist strategy that we're doing, is thinking about looking through that lens. But as well as that, it's very much thinking about how we enable people to have conversations that are uncomfortable for them around race as well, and how they think about some of the work that they're doing that can be through a very Eurocentric lens that doesn't necessarily always open the lens of race for people, to enable them to think about the intersectional differences, the intersectional challenges. And if we don't think about that, then all we're doing is expecting people to assimilate into how we do things here, is what I often say.
It's a really interesting way to approach it, and I totally agree with you in the sense that from a legal point of view, many organisations are viewing things through the Equalities Act and their protected characteristics, but things like lower socioeconomic backgrounds, for example, are not included as part of those protected characteristics. And then, as you mentioned, with all of those intersections, if we're just focusing on race as an example, the racism that the Jewish community experience is very different to the racism that the Southeast Asian community experience or the Black community experience. And I'm interested in your approach in that area, where there isn't a magic wand or a singular approach for all of those different experiences. So when you're working in anti-racism, how do you apply that to make sure that it's both proportionate but also accurate for the community that you're working for?
And I think what people, when we're thinking about this through one lens, I would say that one lens is my work is very much about how we think about ensuring people are really clear about discrimination, about oppression, and about prejudice, and about assumptions they can make about people from different groups because of their belonging to a particular Black and global majority background, or because of their particular belonging to a particular faith. And if I look through that lens in the first instance, we are very much focusing on trying to get people to really understand that when you're talking about anything that relates to negativity, hostility, hate speech, hate behavior, hate crime towards these groups, it's a hate crime, full stop. All of these groups you need to focus on, it's a hate crime, and we need to remind people that when we are oppressing people from all of these groups, Jewish community, Muslim community, Black communities, it's a hate crime. But at the same time, people don't like to hear it. But I do think there is a hierarchy of hate. And I think we need to think about, and that hierarchy of how we treat different groups, I would say, is a challenge, because I think even within those groups that experience hate and racism, I sometimes am seeing right now, probably perpetuated by our society, our politics, lots of different things, that there is even growing division within our own communities, really, within our Black communities, within our Muslim communities, within our Jewish communities. So my role really is to try my best to try and get people to come together. Funnily enough, I was at a community meeting recently with our Muslim community, our Black community, our Sikh community, our Hindu community, and some of our Black community organisations. And I will say to each of those organisations individually, and actually an interfaith meeting I went to actually recently as well. But I will say to each of these communities individually that we need to actually come together more. We need to stop fighting each other. But at the same time, I'm very mindful that we need our own spaces as well. And I think we need to really think about how society, how our politics, how the hostility in our present communities, exacerbated, I suppose, by the rise of the far right, is also assisting, I suppose, to a certain degree, from my perspective, to divide us even more. But I would say we need to find ways to come together, but at the same time, hold on to our own cultures and our own beliefs and our own faiths, because there are differences. But I think in our present hostile climate, we need to find ways to work better together.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it is a scary time when you see kind of the use of misinformation and the way that political figures are able to galvanise communities with that misinformation. It's scary times. The idea behind Boxless has always been that you know meaningful, authentic change and improvement. It very rarely, if ever at all, is going to come from a template or just ticking boxes. And you've spoken about this already, but I'm interested to find out about your approach in terms of the ways you've had to work outside the box to make progress, particularly in an organisation or an institution that is very much about ticking boxes and following kind of procedures. And just wanted to understand how you've managed to navigate that space.
The space requires everybody really understanding that it's uncomfortable, as I've just said, to have these conversations, but we are wanting people and we are asking people to sit with that discomfort as a way of learning and unlearning what may have been things they've grown up with in terms of biases and beliefs and stereotypes about different groups of people and different religions, and people who look different from themselves because of their colour of their skin or their belonging to a particular religious group. So what that has meant is that we are very much focusing on our council-wide anti-racist strategy as a starting point, and getting each different service, each different directorate to think about what are the gaps right now within their service provision. So I don't know, one simple example might be when we're thinking about the action plan and how we're taking things forward, it might be, okay, how can we improve on our ethnicity recording? How can we improve our data so that we're very clear about what's working well, what isn't working well, and what areas do we need to improve on within our work around working with our
Mm.
Black and racially minorised communities. Because we're not going to be able to make improvements, we're not going to be able to build trust and relationships till we're really clear about what our communities are saying, what's working well, what's not working well, and what do we need to do as a workforce to improve in terms of our practice so that our communities can see that their voices are being heard and that we can begin to think about some of the issues that are impacting them. For instance, I don't know, racism within some of the housing estates as well that we might be working with, and particularly that may have become more pronounced following the raising of the flags, for example. Outside of that, it's very much, particularly when I was working within children's services, it's very much, and we're trying to widen that, getting people to have these uncomfortable conversations within their teams, within their supervisions, within their one-to-ones. I do not like the word. I do not like it at all when people say our Black communities, Muslim communities, other communities are difficult to engage. I do not believe that is true. I believe what needs to happen is people need to think about how they are trying to engage with our communities and what they maybe can do differently to try and engage with our communities. One of the things I say is we're always expecting people to come to us as a council. Why don't we go to our communities? Why don't we go to the meetings? Why don't we go to the mosque? Why don't we go to the temple, etc.? Why don't we go to the synagogue, invite them in? And even recently, actually, I was at a conference on Friday. We invited all the interfaiths communities and global majority communities together for an education conference. So we had rabbis, we had priests, we had members of the Christian church, we had Buddhists, all different interfaiths present. So for me, it's about how we do things differently so that we hear the voice of our communities. But at the same time, to actually impact change within the council, a lot of it is getting people to think about not just how we bring our anti-racist action plan to life in terms of things that are working well and not working well, but how do we create spaces to have those uncomfortable conversations so people can actually reflect on their biases, reflect on what maybe is they're finding difficult, reflect on the language used when we're talking about people are difficult to engage. What are the challenges that people may find? It might be, for example, a family member or a resident of our city may say, well, I'm not working with you, you're racist. It's getting people not to be defensive about that. And I talk about that a lot through the lens of white fragility. It's getting people to think through the lens, well, actually, why do people maybe think that you're racist or we as a council are racist? Why do they feel that way? Really thinking about how we listen and not just listen, but what we learn from that. And in terms of thinking about what we learn from that, how we might do things differently if that's how they feel about us. But I'm also trying to really ram home, particularly in our present hostile climate, that, there can be no place and there shouldn't be any place for hate in our city. And there is a campaign we're working with now that's going to sort of show that more visibly, not just for council residents, well, primarily for the council I'm working with and the staff we're working with, but it will become more visible on our websites as well, that we are very much focused on being a
Mm.
city that hate is not going to have a place for. And we've seen that on our streets as well, I think, recently with the counter
Yeah,
protests to the far right.
yeah, and it was pleasing to see Bella Sankey from the council make a public statement about, the essence that everyone believes Brighton has, and I think it was important that that message came
Yeah,
came from the
I
council.
agree.
You you spoke about those assumptions, and in the work that I do, I've seen those time and time again where you know, an organisation we're working with or supporting will say that they've struggled to engage black communities, and actually, when you ask the question, "What have you tried?" more often than not, it's actually that they haven't tried. What other assumptions about anti-racism work do you think we need to put in the bin or take out of the box altogether?
Put in the bin. Well, I think there's a lot of things really. I mean, even though I'm struggling to think at the minute, but um, I think one of the things that's worrying me a little bit is the division that it's causing a little bit at times. I've even heard relayed to me that we've had some black staff members say as well that, all this talk of racism and anti-racism is making it worse for us. And I suppose in terms of some of the other things um, around what can maybe be put in the box, I am of the view that we need to continue to be really explicit, and particularly at a time when governments and our societies want to push back on diversity, equality, inclusion, and anti racism. I am of the view that we should still continue to be really explicit about the division and about how our communities and people from different faiths are being treated differently. I feel there's a sense that we are going backwards. And really, if I wanted to be really radical, if you want me to be really, really radical, I think I would personally say that we need to not just think through the lens of diversity, equality and inclusion, or equality, diversity and inclusion, EDI. I think every council need to start thinking through the lens of anti-racist practice within every single workforce, every company. Not to do away completely, because you're asking me what we do away with. My initial thought was, let's do away with EDI, but not the essence of EDI really when we're thinking through protected characteristics, but more through the lens of we're living in a time that is so hostile, where anything that is different from the perceived white culture, white norm is seen as a threat. I think that's the reason I'm saying that. I think we need to up the ante on really thinking about anti-racist practice and inclusion, because as far as I'm concerned, as a black person and thinking through the lens of other communities, whether you be Jewish, whether you be Muslim, whether you be Sikh, or from any other ethnic minority background, actually, I would say that we're here to stay. What people don't really understand and what people don't really think about, and there's a part of me, because I heard somebody say this to me once on training. I did some anti-racism training, and her grandmother had said to her, this was somebody on the training, that yes, she does fear black people, and she is fearful, because the reason she was fearful is that she was fearful that we would do unto white people what they did to us, in terms of thinking through the lens of slavery. Now, the only reason I use that as an example, and it empowers me a lot when the work is hard and the work is really tiring, is I'm very aware that I am a minority and will remain a minority in many of the spaces that I'm in. But what empowers me when I think through that lens is we are part of a global majority. Yes, I am a minority still within it here, but if I think through that lens of we are part of a global majority, over 80% of our world population is black and brown. And I link that to this information that this person had given me about her grandmother, about the fear of white communities doing, of what they did to the black communities and global majority communities, being fearful of it being done to them. So that's what I hold on to sometimes when not that we're going to go on the rampage and kill everybody, but I I just hold on to the fact that actually when you think through that lens, it's quite empowering that over 80% of the world population is black or brown.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the first point about the fear of having done to what was done to is quite yeah, it sparks a lot of interesting. Yeah, I think it it leads to a lot of questioning about what we're taught as a global society about what success looks like, and the whole kind of divide and conquer tactic of empire is effectively where that fear is coming from, because those are the tactics used for the empire to create what it had. or what it still has, and that it leads me into lots of different places and lots of different questions. One of the things I was really interested to ask you, Millie, is obviously you're going to be working closely with senior leaders. And
Hmm.
in many kind of organizational structures where there's hierarchy of staff, you need to get those senior leaders on side. You need to get them listening. You need to get them to understand about anti-racism for decisions to be made that could impact a wider group of people. How do you approach that with senior leaders, and particularly how do you approach it with senior leaders that are less engaged or less willing to be engaged with the work?
Okay, you've got a bit of an echo now, but that's absolutely fine. I suppose one of the big things, really, because although my background, oh God, over 30 odd years now, is a social worker, I am spreading that work really within the wider council now, within my wider strategic anti-racist role. So I sit under the umbrella of people and innovation or learning and organisational development. So what that means really when we're thinking through the lens of how I bring senior leaders on board and get them thinking about our action plan, getting them thinking about what each directorate is going to do, I go to a lot of senior leadership meetings. I also have put on specific events for council-wide staff, really, when we've got specific dates in the year, like Black History Month or Race Equality Week, or getting people to really think about what racial trauma means, really, for our Black communities. We talk a lot about trauma-informed practice, but actually, I'll be really talking about um, racial trauma when we're talking about our Black and Anglo majority communities. So I go to a lot of senior leadership meetings. I get them to think about what actions they're going to take, really. So, for instance, I might be working with, I don't know, housing or adult services or HR. What are they going to do to make sure that they are thinking about how they are supporting our Black and global majority staff members, our Muslim staff members, our Jewish staff members, and making sure that we are making sure we're doing the best we can in terms of supporting them, and not just supporting them in terms of thinking through the lens of hate crime, is thinking about how we can actually support them in terms of progression and development, because we also have an underrepresentation of Black and global majority staff members within certain parts of the council. So how do we think about that? So as well as looking outward, how do we really think about how we're supporting our staff members inwards into particularly senior leadership positions where they are underrepresented? And some of it also requires very much looking at our data. What is our data telling us? And how can we improve on things? And I suppose the other things that I very much talk a lot about, we have um, things that we talk a lot about. And I suppose my big thing, really, when we're thinking about some of our learning pillars, is how do we think through the lens of diversity, equality, and inclusion and anti racism? And how do we also think about, particularly in our hostile climate, how we're ensuring all of our staff, but particularly our Black and global majority staff members, feel psychologically safe? So, how can managers and senior leaders also support the workforce? But it's very much also thinking about what do senior leaders as a whole, from our councillors to our chief exec to our directors to our heads of service, what can each individual do, as well as the units do as a corporate um, group, to think about how we enhance anti-racist practice. And I would suppose we're doing quite a lot of things. We're doing some campaigns recently right now, which are going to remain for any new staff that join the council. And we've been doing a lot of work around how we think about inclusion anyway, but we've sort of just rolling out now a lot of training and support around anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, hate crime generally. And I've got meetings coming up as well shortly with our Gypsy Roma traveller communities. So it's very much thinking about that. Sometimes I think it's hard to separate the politics from the professional, and we have to in certain instances, because we can't let certain things overlap into our professional role, even though we might have personal opinions and personal views on certain things. But it's still thinking through that lens of actually how do we spread this work across our workforce so that everybody can listen and everybody also feels that they have a space where they can be heard through our anti-Semitism, uh, um, anti-Muslim, Islamophobia, anti-black, anti-immigrant, stop the boat hate, because we're also a city of sanctuary. So, as a city of sanctuary where we welcome asylum seekers and refugees, we have to very much think about how we are making sure that they can hear our voice as a council saying that. So, yes, lots of the work really is always ongoing around how we improve
Yeah.
practice in house and how we enable the voices of our workforce also to be heard so that we can work better with our wider communities.
You said earlier on in the conversation that um, you're adamant that you won't see racism end in your lifetime, which
Mhm.
something I wholeheartedly agree with, that we just continue to chip away.
Yeah.
But this work is, emotionally demanding and progress
Yeah.
is not always immediate. What keeps you going, Millie?
Oh, do you know what? Um, when things have been tough as a social worker, and I'm not on the front line as much as I used to be because I'm more, pardon me, in a senior leadership role, supporting senior leaders, supporting the workforce, and supporting more strategically in terms of thinking about how we progress anti-racism work and practice within the workforce and within our council. But when I moved away from the frontline work and really working with our children and families and communities, even though I still have my hand in a little bit, um, I used to say it's a calling, because social work can be really stressful, really hard, um, and a very thankless task, I would argue, on many times. But I kept going and I kept thinking, oh, there's nothing else I would rather do, really, rather than do what I'm doing. And then I started doing anti racism work, and it has felt like it's been a calling, really. Um, and I still feel like that when people tell me, and I've even had other peers who've been doing this work who feel that they can't continue at the front line in the way I do, with the anti racism work. There is something I would say that is driving me in terms of what does feel like a calling, even though at the same time I am mindful, and there are times when I get down, I get depressed, I want to stop, and I might take a break. I think before Christmas I took 3 months out, no social media, went on holiday, and just unplugged myself for a little while. And I think you have to do that if you're going to continue to do this work, full stop. But I do, as I work within the council as their strategic lead, but I also do some consultancy. And I think the reason I continue going is because although it can seem helpless and hopeless at times, there are sometimes that little glimmer of hope. And even if there's one person I feel that maybe gets it, that maybe, because I did some training recently, and there's somebody who was a bit defensive about coming on the training, um, a white person, and they'd said, they thought they were already not racist, so they didn't need to come on the course at all. And then they'd spoken to their senior leader afterwards and said, "Oh, I never ever thought that. I've always thought I was not racist, but after doing Millie's training course, I realised I do have racist ideology and I want to do something about it." And then
Wow.
I got a feedback sent to me about what this person had said to their senior leaders, which meant that they now wanted to do more work as a white person around anti-racism. Oh my God, that I suppose is why I keep going. If it's just one person, that is one extra person than there was yesterday, who is showing some solidarity as a white person, some understanding of their white privilege, what that white privilege looks like, and how it's different when you're looking at it through the lens of our black and global majority staff members, and communities. If I feel I can have that impact just on one person, that's what keeps me going. But at the same time, I'm under no illusion that, you know, I'm not going to be able to have that impact on everybody. But it's that, I suppose, that keeps me going a little bit. And the other bit that keeps me going, I feel it's important to keep speaking up. The days when we are silent are over. We can no longer be silent, really, in our present climate. We have to speak up. We are here and we're not going anywhere, even if people want us to. So, that's kind of very much my mantra now. I have a right to be here. I was born here, and even if I wasn't born here, I am part of this planet. I am part of the human race. So, the color of my skin should not make me be, seen as somebody inferior. So that's kind of my new mantra, and that's where I suppose a lot of my powers come from. Even though I'd say I've grown into it, because years ago I was very much a people pleaser. I'd say wanted to fit in, didn't want to rock the boat. I'm not saying I'm being difficult, but I rock the boat with our senior leaders and with many other people now, just to get them to think outside of their Eurocentric lens in terms of how it can be excluding rather than including. Mhm.
Well, we want you to keep going, Millie, and we need you to keep going, and we appreciate you.
Thank
And
you.
I concur. We are here and we are not going anywhere. So, on that note, thank you for joining today and sharing some of your experiences and thoughts. And just, yeah, really appreciate you coming and sharing that with us today, Millie. Have a great rest of the day, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.
Take care. Goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.